Hello and welcome to another edition of Station A Office Hours, where we answer all of your clean energy procurement questions live. Per usual, I am joined with some of our clean energy experts. Richard Ling is here with us, and then Menard will be joining shortly. And they are here to answer all of your clean energy procurement questions. Today, we're going to talk about and focus in on how to find the right solution for your business needs. Both Leo and Richard have extensive experience in all types of solutions, and so they're really here to answer anything that pops up in the chat. You can always throw some questions in the chat if you'd like, or we have some questions we're going to cover too. Last week we talked about building qualification process, so if you're interested in that, you can go back and watch that. But this week we are going to try to help you figure out where you're at and what's the best sort of next step for you if you're trying to advance a clean energy project to reach your sustainability goals. So Richard, hello, thank you. I'm going to kick it off with some questions, and feel free to add any other color as you see fit. But I wanted to first help sort of outline the phases or buckets that you see organizations sort of fall into when they're in the buying process. Because I know we have a pretty big variety of people coming to us with very different needs. So if you can, like, what would you say are the sort of phases that you see most people falling into?
Sure. Thanks, Noel. And thank you for everyone joining today. Pleasure to be with you guys again. And so this question is a good one because it kind of applies to everyone, no matter if you're very early on in your sustainability journey or very far along. So there are basically four buckets of categories where any company can fall into when you're thinking about doing your clean energy project. And this could be a solar project, EV charging project, battery storage, etc. The first bucket is you're just interested in a project. You have an ESG mandate, you have a net zero goal, and you've been tasked to do something about it. And this is where a lot of our clients fall into. You might be a Fortune 500 company with public stakeholder pressure to make, to do some action towards your goals. You might be a private company where you simply want to attest to your sustainability acumen and make some progress with solar projects, for example. Or you could be, a single family business. It could be, my point here is that whether you're a very small company or a very large one, a lot of folks that we engage with are still in this first bucket of they're just interested in the project and they have to figure out what to do. So there's a lot of ways to solve for this. And I'll just briefly mention that the most common way is to first do an analysis on what are all the locations that you can possibly do a project in. For a real estate asset manager, this could be pretty easy because it's just all of their real estate assets. And within those assets, you can install clean energy on your rooftops, on your parking lots, on your ground mounts, green space locations, what have you. And traditionally, the way this is done in the clean energy space is you would get all of your site addresses. You would pick your favorite, clean energy software, such as, a Helioscope or an Aurora, and do analyses on all of those sites. You can definitely do it that way. If you choose to engage with a platform like Station A, we also have a SaaS platform where you can simply plug in all of your addresses and get a full portfolio report card, as we call it. So that's the first bucket. You're just interested in the project and you need to do something about it. The second bucket is that you've already analyzed your sites. Like you have, for example, 100 sites that you want to do clean energy projects on. But you need more detail in order to get internal buy-in with your financial audience or your key stakeholders that are, moving forward the project. And traditionally, the pain point here is the projects you have to do, but it's just getting that internal buy-in that's the hurdle. This is very common in a lot of large organizations we work with, such as Fortune 500s. And the solution here is usually conducting a broader and more deep feasibility study. So the feasibility study's purpose is to simply get all the metrics that your internal stakeholders need in order to make a go or no-go decision on the project. So this could be done internally by your team. It can be done through a company like Station A or other companies that analyze sites for feasibility. The third bucket I'll briefly touch on is the sites you want to move forward with, you have internal buy-in, and now you need some indicative quotes from real solar developers or clean energy developers to say to your financial audience, here's what the market actually bears if we were to do this project. And so the traditional approach with this is to run what is called a request for quotes, or if you want a deeper dive, an RFP. And the intention is to just go to the market, canvas the market for quotes for your project, and get real numbers where you can go back to your financial audience and say, here's the cost of the project, here are the savings, here's the payback period, the IRR, etc. And that's when you have real tangible quotes in hand to really talk about things in specific. The
Cool.
final bucket I'll say, was there a comment there, Noe?
No, go ahead. And then I have a question, and it looks like we have a question from a provider in the chat too. So I'll ask you after.
Cool. Awesome. So I'll just touch on this last one briefly. The final bucket you might be in is that you already have indicative quotes in hand, and now you need to actually match with a solar installer or clean energy installer to start building your project. And the approach here is to typically run an RFP, request for proposal, and you'll get all of the menu items you need in order to decide on a winner, such as their qualifications, their costs, their warranty, their O&M, and much more, such as customer references. And from there, you can select a winner, work with that provider, and just start your project. So those are the 4 stages, and hopefully that's helpful.
Okay, so I'll just repeat back what I heard. There's people who just don't have the basic understanding of what the opportunity is that they're sitting on as far as throughout their portfolio. They are like, we need to dive into this and see what our opportunity is as far as like what of our buildings can support solar, what types of financial gains could we see from solar, financing, all of the things. So there's those, that's like the green, I'd say, the greenest green. And then there's people who kind of know what they want, but they're not sure how good those buildings are for solar, and if they're going to make the business case to get the budget, they're going to need more details and verification that those buildings are good. And the answer to that is like a feasibility study on those locations. Then you said RFQ, and you said that's before an RFP, that's before having a project ready. Can you tell me a little more about what are the details someone would be at an RFQ versus an RFP? Like basic, like how do you differentiate between those two?
Yeah, so you can think of an RFQ as the precursor to an RFP in the sense of you simply want to canvas the market and down select a smaller group of providers to actually get the RFP contractable bids. So in an RFQ, instead of getting all the details like warranty, O&M, timeline, references, all that stuff, those are kind of the details of the RFP. You would just get the fundamentals, which include the provider qualifications, maybe some indicative costs. And with that in hand, you can actually down select a shorter list of audience to engage with in the RFP stage. So it's meant to be a time saver for both the buyer and the providers, because the providers can answer an RFQ relatively quickly, and you, the buyer, can get quick responses for an RFQ, know who's interested in your project, and progress to the RFP from there.
Cool. Okay, so we also have a question from LinkedIn in the chat from Alex, and it looks like he's maybe in the provider bucket. He says that they don't install solar, they build tenants for solar, but there isn't a way of getting us listed as a solution. Most RFPs are for like solar build, like contracting projects. And he's asking, is there a way to get involved with Station A? I don't know if we can answer him right now, or if you can answer him. We can follow up with you, Alex, if we don't have an answer for you today.
Yeah, I would say the best way, Alex, is email one of us. We'll have our emails. Mine is just richard@stationa.com. And we can just learn more about your solution and see how we can get you more exposure. But I will say that we do have RFPs beyond just solar work. So we've done things like EV charging work, battery storage work, etc. So we're trying to become more agnostic to different solution providers. So just email us and we'll be sure to take care of that for you.
Cool. And before we ask our next question, we have our other guest joining us, hot off the press. I'm going to let him in here. And then I'm also going to hide my beautiful camera so you guys can take center stage. Okay, you guys ready for the next? Hey, Leo, welcome. Welcome to Office Hours.
Sorry for being late. Nice to be here.
Richie has us off to a good start. Okay, so we have the next question for you guys. For the organizations with less experience or like general understanding of their needs, where you kind of touched on this, but let's really dive into the specifics of where do they start? Like, because there's a lot to gather. So like, what's the best process, like for staging out that kind of need? And Leo, do you want to take this since you just came on in?
Yeah, Yeah, I can take this one. So I think this is where we want to just evaluate on the front ends, like what your needs are, right? And what you're trying to achieve. And we can kind of align best case to the scenario that you're looking for. So I'll kind of start from the top, right? Like you're new to everything, you're trying to figure out what makes sense and when. Maybe it's a full look at the beginning, right, of all of your portfolio of locations to really start to narrow your. I use this river analogy, right, where it's really wide at the top, but then as the river narrows, the water picks up speed. Where once we kind of use our tools, for evaluation, we can actually identify what might be a great opportunity to move forward. Or maybe you've already done that, or you've worked with somebody and now you want to dive deeper to support, say, like an internal case study or a business case for your executive audience. Site feasibility might make sense. So it's a quick, scope of work, 4 to 6 weeks. We gather some, diligence data, and you come back with a clear picture of, say, like what a carport, ground mount solar, and rooftop could look like. Or maybe yet you have a subset that you already know, or if you're a real estate owner, your asset group, asset manager has said, I have capital that wants to invest on all their properties because they have an ESG criteria and they're willing to do 10 properties. We can actually do sort of a look at the market to give you not firm fixed pricing, but maybe a lighter lift in the form of like an RFQ. Was a good fit because it actually helps, think through, what are you getting from, investing in this type of project and what's an expected, cost structure and return. And then full yet would be the full Monty. And that is, I need to go from the beginning or some stage that I just kind of outlined. And I need to get into the marketplace and I need to find the right provider. Somebody's approached me and they've tried to sole source my business, knocked on my door and said, hey, solar would be great on your rooftop, giving me an offer, but I don't know what good looks like. So I'd like to see what all the providers, that are available in the universe for this location and who best matches both on cost, on qualifications, on experience in the market, all these other sort of indiscriminate criteria. And so I think depending on the flavor that you're looking for, there's different solutions that kind of match to that. And, you can maybe think about it in different ways as well. So Richard, I don't know if you have any other comments that, what you've experienced, but that's how I've seen it work really well to kind of think of, where you fall in those or some combination of them.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that, Leo, is if you are in that first bucket that Leo mentioned, where you're just getting started and you want to qualify whether a clean energy project makes sense for you, there are really two key areas that you have to due diligence on before you get started. The first is financial, and this loops in a lot of policy considerations too. So what is, the payback period of your project? Does it make financial sense to do these? Yes, we're doing it for ESG reasons as well, but we've seen a lot of clients also prioritize financial considerations in doing so. So it's really a parallel level consideration. So in the financial bucket, important things to consider are what state am I located in? Where are my assets located? Some states are very optimal for clean energy deployment, such as a lot of the Northeast, such as Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, as well as the Western states, obviously, California, Illinois, et cetera. So a lot of states have supportive clean energy policies, and it's important to do diligence on what policies do I fall into, which also is dependent on the utility region that you're in. And is it financially feasible to do a project there? That's the first thing. The other bucket is physical. So given your asset type, is it physically possible to do a project there? So the term you may have heard are solar ready roofs. And these are roofs that are basically apt to hold the weight of the solar panels in aggregate, and also basically have enough space to fit the panels. So maybe you have a very cluttered roof with a lot of RTUs or HVAC systems. Those might not be the most optimal for solar systems, whereas the roof that epitomizes a fantastic solar system roof is like just an empty square, clean rooftop. So that's the ideal. You might be somewhere in the middle, but that's something you got to diligence on. And in addition to the roof specs, the electrical infrastructure of your system also matters. So what is the amperage and voltage of your electricity panel? What is your transformer kVA rating? Those things often are the upper bounds of how much solar capacity you can fit on your site. So financial and physical are the things that are commonly, sifted out during that due diligence phase if you're pretty early on.
Okay, and so that sounds like a lot. And if you have a lot of buildings, how do people do, like, how do I do this? How would I do it if I was getting started? Like, do I go get that information and bring it to you, like Station A, or do I pay someone to do it? How does it usually work?
Yeah, there are a lot of ways to go about this. I'll just start with this, and Leo, feel free to chime in if I miss anything. But you're correct, Noel. It's a lot of information. I mentioned policy considerations, financial considerations, physical. Fortunately, you don't have to be like an expert in all of those fields. The traditional way to go about this is a lot of folks internally might try to start themselves in this due diligence process, which is great and a good start. So just analyzing their roof specs, their physical location, gathering which assets they want to consider for the clean energy projects. Some folks might also hire like consultants to help with this due diligence. And yet other folks might work with platforms like Station A, where we've already compiled a lot of this information. So for example, just the policy component, our team has fortunately done a pretty deep dive on all 50 state policies within the US and kind of examined the art of what is possible throughout those states. So which states have supported policies, which ones have mediocre ones, and which ones are simply not the right time to do projects, as an example. On the financial side, and the physical side, it is fairly difficult to analyze multiple buildings at once for solar capacity. It depends how deep you want to go, but the traditional softwares like helioscopes or auroras, they take about 30 minutes to an hour to spin up a solid design. And you can imagine doing that on dozens or hundreds of buildings could be quite the time sink. So platforms like Station A, for instance, are able to plug in as many addresses as you want and give you a comprehensive report card, which is more time efficient for some folks. So that is one option. But again, a lot of people do this differently. We're not here to prescribe how you do it, but just kind of inform what is possible. So that's traditionally how it's done, and Station A spin on it as well. So Leo, feel free to add things if I missed anything there.
The only thing I might add, right, is like in the case of like a feasibility, like financial feasibility, you may not know the roof condition. You may not know all of the characteristics of the NEM policies in that market. But if you did know that like this is a highly visible project, right, like, and you're looking for a win, and you've identified there's some interest or somebody's, again, I keep saying this, there's a lot of like interested parties that have come to you. So you're like, what is it about this building, and actually kind of like understanding it. I think that's where like a feasibility study actually works really well to give you some characteristics that you can understand what they're looking at. And like Richard said, like there's technologies that you can do or use that will help you get there faster. But then there's also an element of this that, you need to know what the criteria are that allow you to do this successfully. It's not always visible right on the first pass. And so helping to kind of wade through that, consultants are a common path, but is there an understanding that you need to sort of first establish to coalesce around for internal people to get behind it who don't have the time to learn solar policies in a random state, or how they're changing or evolving, but they do know that they need the outcomes, and that's like sustainability progress.
Yeah. You guys have overseen a lot of projects coming through, like not only the evaluation tools that we offer, but the marketplace tools. So like actually matching a project to a qualified provider. Can you give me an example of where like this stage, like this kind of like deep dive pre-RFP stage, feasibility study stage has really like paid off for somebody that we worked with? Like, is there someone you can think of where, wow, glad we did that. That really saved us a lot of time or showed us something that we weren't expecting?
I can go first. There's one that comes to mind. a company that had a national real estate portfolio. They had a few campuses that they were looking at, one in the Southeast, a couple on the West Coast, one in the Northeast. And we gave them sort of a first pass of like what it would look like through our portfolio evaluation. And then what they really did was work with their real estate group to hone in on, what was the plan for these various buildings. They had manufacturing facilities that they intended to hold on to. And, long term, they had a few lease buildings. And then they had a few that they were expecting to either acquire or remodel. And so it actually gave sort of like a, ER doc triages the room, right? Like we gave kind of like a triage approach in that assessment study. And then we actually dove in a lot deeper on a few of the properties that highlighted maybe where their best expected returns could be expected for, financially, that's what they were looking at. But if you want to do the same for, GHG reduction progress, any number of technologies for resilience. And so we were able to sort of be assigned to say, all right, in 4 weeks, we need this delivered. Our executive team wants to evaluate what our 2024 budgets would be and how we would get this first project kind of built, amongst these properties. And so the deliverable was really effective for this audience, and this audience being somebody that had to kind of speak with real estate, finance, with the executive team, and they needed to speak confidently about what their potential recommendation was. But Richard, you might have that's the one that comes to mind to me.
Now, I'll just add real quick. I won't add another example because I thought that was a spot on one, but just conceptually, the purpose that you might ask the question, like before you go to the market, why is an analysis even necessary? For example, if you were to shop for a car, should I just go to the dealership or should I like due diligence online a lot? With solar, or clean energy in general, since it's a very capital intensive project, we're talking hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars of CapEx spend usually if you choose to do an all cash deal. But needless to say, a pretty hefty project size. The analysis portion is kind of necessary because financial audiences, when making these CapEx decisions, need to see what is this going to cost me? What is this going to save since it is so substantial? And that is the purpose of these kind of desktop analyses. So it's nice to see first what is possible on paper before you go to the market so that you can gut check yourself and gut check the bids you get back during the RFP or RFQ phase. So
what kind of benchmarks then are these decision makers looking for project approvals? Like what are the big ones? If it's, it might be obvious, but let's just say it just so we're speaking the same language.
Yeah. So if we're just talking, let's just conceptualize for a solar project first, since that's the most common one. The top line metrics that matter the most, what is the overall cost of the system? Even if you're not doing an all cash purchase, you could do a power purchase agreement or a C-PACE loan, what have you, but the cost of the project is always, tangibly important. The next things are the savings. So obviously you're doing this as an investment to get some sort of return. So how much am I going to save off of my electricity bill? And in solar speak, what is the avoided cost of electricity of my system? So that's the second one. Then you get into things like the payback period. So the payback period is very important for a lot of our clients because they need to measure this against other investments that they want to make, whether it's a new refrigeration system for their warehouse or a new, machinery for their, a manufacturing facility. They need to measure these CapEx expenditures side by side. So payback period often does matter. Similarly, IRR is another investment metric that matters for some of our audience, especially real estate folks. And they simply consider this as a real value add investment on their properties. So what is the IRR return of that? And the inverse of that, the NPV as well matters. So those are some of the top line metrics that I've seen clients care a lot about. Leo, do you have any more that come to mind there?
I'll maybe put an exclamation point on the IRR. With if it's NPV or IRR, whatever your sort of like hurdle rate is, for building a project. A real estate owner had this great analogy of, are we going to use our capital to deploy to buy a building, or are we going to invest in the building? It's like as simple as that. We're going to use capital, but how are we effectively going to use it? And these projects, need to serve many purposes. And I think we always default to most of the baseline for organizations is built upon financial results. But then there are other organizations that are entirely looking to advance their sustainability or their aspects that they want to support the local development of energy. And that's the reason to support these on-site energy projects. So whether it be they've already invested in solar and now want to add a battery. In the case of California, right, there's like incredible funding sources that are available that you can apply for. They can enhance sort of the value that you've already made. Or there's other aspects of your organization has some sensitivity. Some businesses have sensitivities to power loss. And so is there a way to build a resiliency factor into this that we can help you sort of like work through what the financials would be to help you achieve that and over what time span? But I would say like there's really like those baseline elements that matter. The only thing that we haven't really talked about is the renewable energy credits. Based in some markets, there are compliance markets that value these extremely highly versus others, where there's no established market like that. And depending on what you intend to do with them and how you structure contract can really change the value to the project. So it's helpful to just kind of know what your options are and align that with what you're looking to achieve, by building one of these.
We have time for like one more question, but I want to dig into this. I've actually never asked you guys this question before, but since we're talking about IRR and return on investment and weighing those, how sure of an investment is solar? Like if I'm getting my feasibility study, it's predicted my building's going to consume this much energy, produce this much savings, compared to me looking at real estate trends and how much a building will appreciate and gain value or collect in tenant fees. Like how predictable is this? Like how sure is my bet? Is I guess my question when I'm betting on solar.
Yeah, that's a great question, and not often asked. So I'm glad you asked it, Noel. So in a solar development, when I hear that question, what comes to mind are what are the risks that could derail the solar investment, that could make it more risky, and there are a couple elements that we look out for. The first is since solar is inherently done in order to basically give your asset or your building power, the amount that you save is highly predicated on your current cost of electricity from your utility. So let's say you're in Southern California, your utility is Southern California Edison, and you pay 20 cents per kWh for electricity. The savings of your solar system depends on how that electricity rate fluctuates year over year. Now, typically, these electricity rates on a national basis increase by about 3 or 2.5% per annum. That's what we've seen over the past 50 years. If trends continue like that, then solar should theoretically save you more and more every year because your cost of electricity, if you did not have solar, would be increasing at that rate every single year had you not had solar. So that's an important factor. But the risks for that, to answer your question, is if inflation goes down significantly one year or macroeconomic conditions change, and let's say a utility actually decreases their cost of electricity, that's an inherent risk to your solar system, and a lot of questions get asked to us about that. There are some safeguards against that, though, and this goes into the details that I won't touch on too much. But a lot of solar contracts have safeguards against, what happens if the COE decreases more than we expected, because all solar developers kind of forecast an indicative estimate of how the cost of electricity increases every year. So there are safeguards, but that's one important factor. The other important factor is the other side of that equation, which is how much your solar system produces. This is well documented and calculated in a lot of solar technologies like PV Syst, which is commonly used, helioscope, which I mentioned before. But what developers do is they actually introduce a confidence interval for the solar system production, which is typically called like a P90 or a P95 interval. And that basically gives them, in other words, like a P90 says that there is a 90% confidence that the production will at least meet this threshold. And the other side of that, which is more contractual, is what's called a production guarantee. So what's often done in solar contracts is the developer, let's say, NextEra or whomever develops your solar system, they will tell you a production guarantee level where if they go under that for any year, they have insurance to basically kind of repay you that amount and make up the difference. So that's just an example, but that's often used in a lot of solar contracts to mitigate those risks. Those are two I'll mention, but Leo, if you have any more, feel free to chime in.
That was incredible, Richard. I was going to go more simply. If I was a real estate owner, I'm investing in my building and I'm decreasing my operating expenses. I'm adding value to my inherent investment in my property. So if I were ever to sell the property, I would have defensible look at what the value is. Utility rates, like Richard said, can go up or down. Historically, it's gone up and pretty consistently across every market. So the value, if you were to think about it, you are flatlining your expected cost in the form of you've made this investment. And I equate it to, you invest in your retirement fund with an expectation that you're going to draw upon it someday. So it grows over time, but you've made that fixed investment at a point in time. That's essentially what you're doing here, making an equipment, a CapEx investment, and you're going to realize that over expense reduction over time. So there are inherent costs that come up, but like disproportionately, you can rely pretty heavily on those sorts of results. But hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that does answer. And I had so many more questions that we didn't even get to, but we are at time. This went so fast. But hey, we're going to do it again. So that's great. We'll answer these questions next time. And so thanks to everyone who joined us or who's watching this later recorded. We will be hosting these monthly. So feel free to hit us up and we're always here to answer questions. And Richard and Leo, thank you for your expertise. It was nice chatting.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone who showed. Appreciate the time.
See you guys next time.
All right.
Bye now.
Thanks.